Good morning. I'm Dagen McDowell in from Maria Bartiromo. It's Tuesday, September 18th. Your top stories at 8 a.m. Eastern. Florence fallout, the death toll rising to 32 as that storm brings more flooding. It's also creating tornadoes in Virginia. We have the very latest. The tariff threat now a reality. The United States will hit China with a new 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of imported goods, many consumer goods, next week. But the administration doubling down on why it is making this move.
I have groups come in to talk to me about how the Chinese are just playing unfair and driving them into the ground and putting them out of business. If we have those tariffs in place, American companies will be able to make things, and American workers will make them with their hands.
We are looking at a rebound in the futures. We have a 71-point gain on the U.S. futures, on the Dow futures this moment. This after declines across the board yesterday. The technology sector particularly hard hit over those tariff fears. The NASDAQ composite on Monday losing nearly 1.5%. Checking the global market action in Europe, we have buying across the board, although slight gains in England, France, and Germany, and it was the same story overnight in Asia. All four major markets there to the plus side. To the latest battle on Capitol Hill over the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. He and his accuser will both testify in public, but the timing still unclear. What are the Democrats up to? We ask that question and look for answers. Plus, a new controversy for European automakers. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Volkswagen, among others, now being investigated for collusion. And fly him to the moon. Elon Musk revealing who will be making the first trip on the moon loop as a space tourist. We'll tell you who bought that golden ticket. All that and so much more coming up this morning. Fox News contributor Kat Timpf, Benchmark managing partner Kevin Kelly, and CFRA investment strategist Lindsey Bell. Would you go to the moon if somebody bought you a ticket?
Absolutely, I go to the moon. Why not? I haven't been there yet.
Given what's happening on Earth, I bet you'd want to stay.
Yeah, it'd probably be pretty nice.
We'll cover that and so much more this morning. We're watching market action. Good news, because, again, investors seem to be not thinking that China is going to retaliate in any significant way that hurts the United States.
Yeah, but
economy of profits.
Look at two big bellwethers. FedEx is down because their capital costs are increasing and they're reinvesting, as well as labor costs are going up. The other important thing, I think, is Oracle, and I think that's pretty telling because you've got three dominant players in the hybrid cloud. One of them was who Maria interviewed, Satya Nadella, right? So with Microsoft Azure, Amy Hood said they're reinvesting in that. Their gross margins are going up. Amazon, AWS, and then you also have Google. So Oracle's trying to fight to get that fourth spot. IBM seems to be there, but it's playing out in their stock right now.
Well, and I think that when you look at technology and just the market overall, this is going to be a tough earnings season because the bar is high. It's going to be the third quarter in a row for 20% plus earnings growth. And people are going to be razor focused on guidance. They are every quarter, but now that these $200 billion in tariffs are in place, we're going to want to see what that does to guidance. 20% plus quarterly earnings growth. This is the 3 quarters in a row. How long ago was it that actually happened? You have to go back to 2010-11, and that's when you're coming out of the recession, right, where you're seeing outsized growth just off of like down 50% numbers.
Real quick, this storm has given every company an excuse, as well as the government. If we get a weak first quarter of next year, they're going to blame the storms, and they're not going to blame tariffs.
Well, and let's move on to the impact of Florence. The death toll hitting 32 people dead, and this is across the Carolinas and Virginia. The heavy rains made their way out of the area, but the impact of this storm will be felt for a long time to come. Jeff Locke is in Lillington, North Carolina, with more. Hey, Jeff.
You may get a boost in the economy a little bit down the road as this rebuilding takes place, because there's a lot of rebuilding to do. This, as promised, the Cape Fear River out here behind me, and perhaps you see it as the sun reflects off the river. Nice blue, beautiful sky today. That boat's not sailing anytime soon, perhaps you see out there. And this was what they were concerned about, the two bridges that go into Lillington, North Carolina, over the Cape Fear. There's this one, and then the one behind it you really can't see. That's the lower bridge. They were thinking they might have to shut that down, but we have hit a crest here, we believe, and are on the way down. But people still amused by, in some ways, this river. I don't know if Ben's able to come all the way back around. Maybe you'll see the group of people that's just come down to photograph this river because they haven't seen this since Matthew. Somebody's talking about the flood of 1945 back here in Lillington, which apparently was the all-time winner. From the air, perhaps you see the best indication of the wide swath of damage that is really playing out all over North Carolina. As I said, a lot of rebuilding to do, Dagen, and perhaps that will give the economy a boost at some point. That tends to be whatever slowdown you have going into it, coming out of it. A lot of hammers, a lot of nails, a lot of boards, and the rest. Dagen.
Jeff, thank you so much from Lillington, North Carolina. Thank you, Jeff, for the reporting as always. Here now is South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman. Congressman, how are rescue operations going in your state?
It's going well, Dagen. Of course, the issues we have are flooding. The lake, the rivers are full, and some of the bridges, the water is hopefully have crested, but the down trees, we've got 800 people without a power in 3 counties, and it's been a devastating hit, not like the Fayettevilles and the Wilmingtons, but the water damage and the damage it's doing to our roads is going to be seen for a long time. But the rescue missions have gone well. The reaction has been great from most of the authorities, and we've came out as well as can be expected.
Congressman, it's Kevin Kelly. I'm glad you're here today because you're on the House Small Business Committee, and one of the things that's happening today is the tariffs are being enacted, but I've talked to several small businesses that they're actually pleased by some of the tariffs and this administration going after the Chinese government, just given the fact that a lot of their the products they make have been knocked off. They go over to China, they get molds made over there, and then all of a sudden the Chinese are copying them, flooding them into the market, undercutting them. What are you hearing from the small businesses that you're speaking with in regards to the Chinese tariffs?
Well, you know, the businesses in my district are excited about the fact that we're finally getting tough with a country like China that's still in our intellectual property. I've been in businesses that have walled off areas that the Chinese have bought the people that used to work there and taken the properties. And as people know, when they go to China, they own 51%. They control it. So the 10%, I think, is fair. And again, the overall thought is, why should China charge a 10% and us charge 2.5%? It doesn't make sense. I think most of the people are excited about the jobs that are going to be created and the fact that we're going to make it in America, not China.
But, Congressman, to push back on that a little bit, that this is, to quote the Wall Street Journal, it's politically managed trade in the sense that it kind of goes against the deregulation that the Trump administration has pushed and really freed up businesses to operate and without the regulations and being tied up, if you will. But this has caused businesses to ramp up lobbying. You have thousands of applications for waivers from the steel and aluminum tariffs. It actually complicates doing business and makes the Washington swamp even swampier in some ways.
Yeah, but that's not anything new. I mean, the
yeah, but the policy is new, and it makes it worse in some ways when they're trying to basically clean the swamp and drain the swamp. Well, they just threw some new algae into it.
Well, what they're doing is, I mean, the lobbyists are doing their job, but what we've got to do is think about the country. We've got to think about, as you say, the regulations that have been lifted, factories that are running full bore. The issue that we have now are getting workers to fill the orders to the companies that are expanding. And it's, for the most part, because of the regulations that have been lifted. The Federal Registry is down 20% in regulations alone, which is a good thing. It's going to hurt for a while, but again, we've had talk for years and years on getting tough with China. This president has been the only one that's actually put into effect. And if you remember, the president was talking about 25% tariff on $200 billion to $300 billion. What the reality is now, to date, 10% on $200 billion. So I think the effects on this country will be good long term. The medicine is bitter for a while, but I think it's going to be, in effect, pay dividends for this country.
Congressman Lindsey Bell here. So do you think that those tariffs, do we get to January 1st of 2019 and those tariffs go up to 25%, at which point you will put a significant more amount of pressure on the U.S. consumer, and that will be a problem for the economy?
Well, I think that's where the exemptions come in. I think what this president has done is there's been exemptions, particularly with those products that you have to ramp up. It's not something that can be put into effect immediately. And I think he's been fair on ramping, the tariffs, putting an amount in that's fair, and then giving time to ramp up. He did that with Samsung as an example on washing machines in an area that a company, Samsung, was making washing machines. And instead of the Whirlpool was calling for 50%, it ended up, he ramped it up 20%, then 15, and then 12, which I think is fair. So for the companies themselves to give those companies time to put the proper procedures in place to make the products, particularly in the automobile industry, which is very important in South Carolina.
But what about increased manufacturing costs? Are you concerned that that could have political implications for the president?
I don't think he's doing, I think he's, the political side of it comes way down the list. He's doing it for the sake of the country. And we can't be a country that flips hamburgers and serves milkshakes. We got to be a manufacturing country, as we were in the 30s and 40s and 50s. That's what makes this country great. Should we make steel? I would make the argument, yes. Should we make aluminum? Yes. Should we grow our own products that the farmers produce? Yes, instead of relying on imports. And that goes for every other sector. Look at what's happening in the energy with oil, with gas. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, but the pipelines, for example, there were pipelines being planned, and these, like Plains All American, got hit by that steel tariff because they were sourcing their steel on this planned pipeline from the Permian Basin out of Europe. So again, there are all these knock-on effects, Congressman, and I'd argue growing up in the very rural South, there are pluses and minuses to open trade. The pluses being, since the 1940s, the quality of life and the things that people could own and buy. The quality of life in many ways improved in the rural South because people could go out and buy cheaper goods that were less expensive because they weren't made in the United States.
Well, but it's the overall picture that this president sees, in my opinion. And you mentioned the regulations that have been cut. Had it been just one thing, had it just been the tariffs, that would be one thing. But the fact that the regulations are coming down, the costs of doing business, the fact that people now are not applying for the benefits like they were, I think is a good thing for this country. And I think the overall, you're going to see the positive results. And I think politically, Americans get it, particularly the manufacturers that I talk with in my district.
And I just want to be clear, I grew up in a small town that the textile and the furniture manufacturing jobs, those did disappear. And my own parents were put out of business because of Walmart and Sam's Club. They ran a wholesale grocery. So I do understand the impact of these, this quote unquote free trade. It wasn't free for many people, but there are benefits that I just wanted to point out, Congressman. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Congressman Ralph Norman. Coming up, Volkswagen under fire, why the automaker is reportedly being investigated for collusion later this hour. And SpaceX spaceman, Elon Musk naming the one lucky man rich enough to become the first tourist to loop the moon. A sheriff's deputy killed in the line of duty in California. Cheryl Casone has more. Cheryl?
Yeah, Dagen, Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Mark Straziak shot and killed in a shootout at a Pep Boys store. Another officer, the suspected gunman, and a bystander were all shot and injured in this shooting. This is the second fatal incident for the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department in little more than a year. Since the start of 2018, at least 37 law enforcement officers across the U.S. have died from gunfire. Well, overseas, a Russian spy plane has been accidentally shot down by Syrian government forces, killing all 15 on board. And Moscow is blaming Israel Russia's military claims that the plane disappeared from radar near the Syrian city of Latakia, just as Israeli F-16s were launching airstrikes on targets in that same area. Now, Russia says Israeli pilots used its plane as a shield and pushed it into the line of fire. Russia also says the Israeli military gave too little warning for the plane to get out of the way. Well, now to North Korea. Kim Jong-un reportedly saying his summit with President Trump in June has stabilized the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. Kim making the comment during his third summit with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Kim also thanking Moon for his part in arranging the summit with Trump. More talks between the leaders of the two Koreas are set for tomorrow. Okay, Elon Musk's SpaceX is making strides, introducing its first space tourist. Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa is going to blast off from Earth in 2023.
Finally, I can tell you that I choose to go to the moon.
Maezawa is an avid art collector. He says he is going to invite 6 to 8 artists to participate in the lunar voyage as a way to inspire their work. No price tag was disclosed for the ride, but Dagen, you can bet it's not cheap. And those are your headlines.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, but did he get a Tesla? Does it come with a free Tesla?
Sure, why not? There you go.
I mean, if he's taking SpaceX, right, it's like...
I'm sure he owns several.
Yeah. Well, he made all his money in e-commerce, so people know.
Coming up, a promising young golfer found dead on the golf course. The latest as a suspect is charged in her death. Plus, national anthem protests return to Monday Night Football. We have the lowlights ahead. President Trump leveling more tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. The futures are in positive territory this morning, up 51 points on the Dow futures after losses across the board yesterday. Lindsey, if we go back and look at how the markets have done since these tariffs were first, the idea of them was first introduced. This is the market since tariffs were first announced at the end of February. We have gains across the board, and the S&P 500 is pretty doggone close to a new all-time high.
Right, yeah, and I think what you'll see, though, if you look at the actual chart over the period of time since February, you've seen volatility. These markets have been whipsawed. On positive news or seemingly positive news, you see the market spike. On negative news, you usually see it come down. You saw the market come down yesterday in reaction of Trump's tease to the announcement of these new tariffs, but today the market is up. I think that the market continues to believe that this is the next step in a negotiating tactic, and that Trump is calling China's bluff. You are seeing them make changes over there. They have devalued their currency. They have reduced the reserve requirements for the banks. They're opening their credit markets. They are trying to stimulate the economy in the wake of these new tariffs.
Well, I think the most important thing that we didn't put up here was we put up the S&P 500, but the small caps.
Were you saying we're not doing a good job?
No. That's fine. I'm just saying that small caps have performed better than large caps, which are the ones we put up on the screen. And so it's important to note that that's more of a, there we go. There's the Russell 2000. So you can see that that's actually done better than its larger brethren. And that's more tethered to the U.S. economy. And Trump is currently focused on the midterm elections. He wants to maintain the House. He wants to maintain the Senate. And so what is he going to do? He's going to go out there and say he's had promises made, promises kept as a campaign slogan. And what did he say when he was running for president? He could levy up to 30% tariffs on the Chinese. So what is he starting out with? He's starting out with 10% tariffs on $250 billion worth of goods. Right. So he's trying to show that he's walking the walk. And now we're going to hear him talk about the border wall. And this is all just part of President Trump and how he operates.
Let's go to Verdant's Capital Advisor CEO, Leo Kelly. What do you think it means? Because this, again, it takes us up to about half of the amount of goods that we import into this country every year just from China that will now have tariffs on them. But the administration starting out with 10% tariffs, going to 25% at the end of the year. So the impact will be much smaller before the midterm elections. What do you say?
Well, I think this is the classic Trump negotiating tactic where you have boundaries on either side of a point, and he's going to try to push those boundaries further out in his favor so that when there's a compromise in the middle, it's more favorable to the U.S. This is the strategy that's happened over and over and over again. I think what's important here is to keep in mind that this is 10% of a large number. And this is a game where China's strengths historically are going to put them at a disadvantage. So when you have a massive trade surplus, when you do have tariffs, when you're being restrictive on business coming into your country, that helps you in your growth phase. But now in their maturity phase, that tends to have a problematic effect on their negotiating ability. And let's not forget, they have been pegged to the dollar. Now, why that's starting to release, it's going to take time. And so China's in a very precarious situation. I think we know it. I think this is a classic negotiating tactic. I think the main point here is for everybody to remain calm and keep in mind a long-term view on the markets.
But in the short run, Lindsey, we really need to see a deal get done with Canada, and there's kind of a loose deadline this week. We have negotiations still underway with the Canadian piece of NAFTA. It really has to get sealed essentially by the end of this month in order to get it in front of Mexico before the current president, Peña Nieto, leaves.
Right, and that will be a huge benefit to the market. I think the market will receive that well. But Leo, I would just ask you, how do you invest in this market right now when we don't really know where things are going? And if this is a negotiating tactic, when does the game end?
Well, I think the way you invest in this market is how you always invest in the market, and that is take a long-term view and look for fundamental valuations that make sense. To be fair, our concerns are not the tariffs. They're the Fed raising interest rates in a more aggressive posture as wages start to improve. Our concerns are high valuations in pockets of the market. And so if you look back in time, there's always something in front of the market that's going to cause concern and have folks thinking, this is the moment where the 10-year bull market comes to an end. I think you have to stay calm, look for value. So right now there's plenty of opportunity in the market, but there's also some overvaluation in the market you have to be aware of. And I will add one other point. Let's not forget, for every tariff dollar that's put into the economy, and we hear these stories about certain industries or businesses that have these challenges because of the tariffs. Remember, there's another group of businesses that benefit from those tariffs.
Thank you, Leo. Good to see you, Leo Kelly, joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure.
Supreme Court showdown. White House Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp, weighs in on the latest controversy around Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation and the politics being played by Democrats, plus lost in transit, Americans spending more time on their daily commutes. How much longer? Stay with us.
Shake it for the birds, shake it for the bees, shake it for the catfish swimming down deep in the creek, for the crickets and the critters and the squirrels. Shake it to the moon, shake it for me, girl. Oh, country girls, shake it for me, girl.
Welcome back. I'm Dagen McDowell in from Maria Bartiromo. It's Tuesday, September 18th. Your top stories at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. Florence fallout. The storm leaving at least 32 people dead in its wake, and historic flooding in the region. More than 100,000 people are trapped in one North Carolina city, trapped without power in Wilmington. More tariffs. President Trump set to activate another round of tariffs now on $200 billion worth of goods imported from China. Many of these consumer goods. White House Trade Policy Advisor Peter Navarro telling me earlier this morning why these tariffs are necessary.
This is the time for China to be held accountable for its non-market economy behavior, for its cheating. Going forward, we can't have a healthy global economy if one of the biggest economies is basically a predator.
China reportedly readying a plan to retaliate against U.S. tariffs. They have a lot more to lose than we do, according to the White House. Futures are showing gains across the board, a 61-point gain on the Dow futures. Same story in Europe. We have buying across the board in England, France, and Germany. And again, up markets galore in Asia overnight. All four markets there to the plus side. An eye on earnings. Mixed reports from AutoZone and General Mills taking a toll on both stocks in pre-market trading. General Mills has ticked to the upside, but AutoZone down 5%. We'll break down those numbers. On the gridiron, the Bears beating the Seahawks last night. This after two players chose to snub our nation during the national anthem. Now to the latest battle on Capitol Hill, the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh and the woman accusing him of sexual assault back when they were teenagers in the early 1980s will both testify in public. But Blake Burman is covering the story from the White House, and he has more on these developments. Hey, Blake.
Hi there, Dagen. The questions surrounding Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court continue to pile up. Kavanaugh is now scheduled to head back to Capitol Hill on Monday to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Christine Blasey Ford has been invited to speak to that committee as well. Ford's attorney yesterday said that should the committee ask for her testimony, she would go up to Capitol Hill. However, Fox is told this morning that Ford has not yet responded to the invitation. As for the allegations here, Ford accuses Kavanaugh of sexual assault during their teenage years at a high school party, and Kavanaugh continues to deny those accusations, saying in a statement yesterday, quote, "This is a completely false allegation. I have never done anything like what the accuser describes to her or to anyone. President Trump is standing by his Supreme Court nominee."
I want him to go in at the absolute highest level. And I think to do that, you have to go through this. If it takes a little delay, it'll take a little delay.
Kavanaugh's nomination was a mere formality just a handful of days ago, but now the committee vote for Thursday has been scrapped ahead of Monday's scheduled hearing. Republicans Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins have said they want to hear from Ford before they can cast any vote.
Obviously, if Judge Kavanaugh has lied about what happened, that would be disqualifying.
Dagen, Republicans had hoped for a full Senate vote next week. The Supreme Court gets back into session on October 1st, so that was kind of the timeline that they were hoping for. But most everything right now appears to be up in the air. Dagen.
But, Blake, just to reiterate something, Christine Ford has been asked to testify, but we do not know when that will happen.
Yesterday morning, her attorney said that if she would be asked to testify, she would show up. Yesterday afternoon, Chuck Grassley went forward, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and said there's going to be a hearing on Monday. And Fox is told that Ford has been contacted, or at least her attorney has, but so far has not yet accepted the invitation. Not to say that she won't, but just that so far it has not been accepted. Dagen.
Blake Burman, thank you so much for that reporting. Joining me now, White House Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications, Mercedes Schlapp. Mercedes, we're waiting for confirmation that Brett Kavanaugh's accuser will appear and when in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. But could this be another delay tactic by the Democrats, which have clearly politicized to the extreme this woman's accusations?
Yeah, it's been incredibly unfortunate that we've seen the Democrats, in particular Senator Feinstein, play these delay tactics during this time. I mean, let's think this through in terms of a process. Senator Feinstein knew about this letter back in July. She met with Brett Kavanaugh, never even brought up a question on this accuser's allegations. Secondly, then they go into a closed committee meeting where, again, they're able to talk about any sensitive topics. Doesn't come up. Thirdly, then, Judge Kavanaugh sent over 1,000 written questions. Not one of those questions included this allegation. So to bring it up in the last minute is incredibly disturbing. We know exactly what the Democrats are trying to accomplish here, because they've made it very clear that they're refusing to support an incredibly qualified individual, someone who has served our country with dignity, both in the executive branch and in the judicial branch. And let's remember, Judge Kavanaugh has been confirmed 6 times. So he's an individual that is so highly respected by so many in the legal community, those of us who have worked with him personally, like I have in the Bush administration. And all I can tell you, he is a man of great integrity, of great character, and should be confirmed.
Well, and Mercedes, you had Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, talking about these allegations need a full investigation before moving ahead with a vote. But I've heard many people outside of politics ask the question, how do you investigate something that happened 36 years ago when these two individuals were teenagers? An investigation is impossible. That you have one woman saying one thing and remembering one thing, and then not just Brett Kavanaugh, but also his friend Mark Judge saying something altogether different in terms of denials.
Well, Judge Kavanaugh, I mean, he's made it very clear that this is completely a false allegation. He called members of the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, and the one thing Judge Kavanaugh said, he's like, I'm ready to testify today. I want to go public. I want to be able to clear my name. I have to tell you, Dagen, I've spent a lot of time with Judge Kavanaugh during our younger years, I'd like to add. And one of the things that I learned about him was that he was so incredibly professional. I mean, when I was a young female staffer, we worked endless hours in the White House, and I have to tell you, he was always professional, always respectful. He was beloved by our staff in the White House, and you know, I also pride myself because I was able to see how he met his wife Ashley, went to their wedding. I have been a part of his life, and I've seen him and how he is just an incredibly professional and respectful individual with the highest of character.
The Wall Street Journal editorial today on this subject, titled "The Me Too Kavanaugh Ambush," is especially blunt, and they write in part, no one, including President Donald Trump, needs to attack the accuser, this being Christine Ford. She believes what she believes. But this is not a he said, she said. This is a case of an alleged teenage encounter, partially recalled 30 years later without corroboration, and brought forward to ruin Mr. Kavanaugh's reputation for partisan purposes.
Look, we have allowed the Senate Judiciary Committee to set up the process, and as the president had mentioned yesterday, he talked about that we want a thorough process. We want to make sure we get this right. And so they're going to allow for this public hearing. And what we know is that Judge Kavanaugh is ready to go today. He's ready to testify today. And what's so disturbing and what's so unfortunate is that the Democrats, this is like their October surprise. This is their willingness to, or September surprise, I should say to that. This is their willingness to stop Kavanaugh any way they can. And I have to tell you, it is incredibly disrespectful in terms of the fact that when you look at Judge Kavanaugh's life, when you look at the fact that he has received the highest ratings when it comes to his work and what he's done as a judge, but I can talk about him as a human being and the fact that he is someone who really would take the responsibility of us being a Supreme Court justice. He would take it. He understands the grave responsibility and has been incredibly respectful to those women out there. I mean, we had 65 women, many of them who knew him during high school and college, who have come out with statements. And we stand with Brett Kavanaugh because this is just disgraceful as they're trying to tear down his name.
And as the Wall Street Journal kind of goes into this, the Republicans, the Senate Republicans, need to be careful that they don't give in to this calculated political ambush. To use the Journal's words, really quickly, Mercedes, this Russia investigation, President Trump ordering documents and text messages related to this probe to be declassified, including selected portions of the FISA application on Carter Page. Why does the president feel this is so important to do right now?
Well, you have had multiple committees in Congress who have been asking for these materials to be declassified. The president wants to be cooperative and as well as be transparent during this situation with the Russian investigation. That is why he's asking for the Department of Justice to declassify these materials.
Mercedes, thank you so much for being here. Mercedes Schlapp, as always. Coming up, driving into controversy, why Volkswagen and other European car makers are being investigated for collusion. Plus, Bears trounced the Seahawks. We give you a wrap-up of the Monday Night Football game. The kneeling protests did continue. Stay with us.
Baby, I know you're asking me to stay.
A champion college golfer found dead on a golf course in Iowa. Cheryl Casone has the details. Cheryl.
It's such a sad story, Dagen. The body of 22-year-old Celia Barquin Aruzea Mainu found yesterday on a course in Ames, Iowa. Barquin was finishing her studies towards a civil engineering degree at Iowa State where she was recently named Female Athlete of the Year. The university's president said there was no doubt she was headed for the very top. She was already invited to the Women's British Open next year. Police arresting 22-year-old Colin Daniel Richards and charging him with first-degree murder. According to court records, Richards has a long criminal record. Well, now to the NFL. A couple of Seahawks players did not stand on the sidelines for the national anthem last night. Defensive tackle Quinton Jefferson and offensive tackle Dwayne Brown stayed back in the tunnel, something they did in the opener and in the preseason. As for the game, the Chicago Bears sunk their claws into the Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson. Prince Amukamara picked off the first pick six. Wilson has thrown in 2,778 pass attempts. Bears set the Seahawks to 0-2, winning 24-17 is their record. German car makers are being investigated for possible collusion. The European Union wants to know if they work together to limit the development of clean air technology. Now, the probe comes after regulators conducted surprise inspections at BMW, Daimler, Audi, and Volkswagen plants. The raids were prompted by information from VW that those companies had jointly discussed the development of technologies to limit emissions. Well, Volkswagen admitted in 2015 to rigging nearly 11 million diesel-powered vehicles to cheat on emissions tests. Speaking of driving, commutes keep getting longer in America. The Census Bureau says commuters spent an extra 2.5 hours in transit last year. The average commute time was 26.9 minutes, up from 26.6 minutes in 2016. New York, shocker, at the top of the list. The average one-way trip to work, 37 minutes last year. Or longer, it seems, from everybody I know that commutes, Dagen. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Kat, you walk to work. That's your commute.
Yeah, I do.
Don't you walk to, I'm not joking. You really do walk.
I do. I walk to work. It's in the winter. I generally take like Uber Pool or something like that because that's just brutal and I'm not doing it. But yeah, it's like the only exercise I really get. I don't like the gym. Rather walk.
I got a 30-minute commute from door to door.
But this has serious implications on quality of life, on these local economies in terms of you have these cities, once small, have become gigantic, spread out. The infrastructure has not kept up with their growth. I always think about even Raleigh or Charlotte, North Carolina as examples.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big infrastructure question, and it comes down to almost like, do you think that people probably need to start thinking about carpooling more? You got one person in the car on the way.
Listen, we just need to build out autonomous driving, but we're going to need more 5G infrastructure built out in small cell towers. That way we all can kick back and let the car get frustrated and have autonomous rage.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. Well, the commute from like up in Connecticut is literally 2 hours. It should be 40 minutes, and there's no cell service between Connecticut, and this is the biggest city in the country. So
yeah,
another failure for the liberal bastion that is in New York and the tri-state area. Coming up, stocks to watch before the bell. Gerri Willis has the latest on earnings live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Stay with us.
I want to love you madly. I want to love you now. I want to love you madly. Wait, I want to love you.
AutoZone and General Mills out with earnings this morning. Gerri Willis on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange with the details. Good morning, Gerri.
Hey, good morning, Dagen. That's right. Two companies reporting both with an earnings beat and a revenue miss. Let's start with AutoZone. Yeah, that company disappointing investors this morning, and the tone in the release this morning, tepid outlook. We'll find out more at 10 a.m. when the company has a conference call, but lots of concern about the stock this morning. You see it's down about almost 6% now. General Mills also down. Similar concerns here, a revenue miss, lower margins, and importantly, a decline in the company's North American business. This is predominantly where they do business is North America. It's a big piece of their pie, that big concerns there. The company also battling rising freight costs, railroad, trucking fleets, all of that costing more for a company like General Mills. That's very important. Just want to mention quickly one bright spot. Pet food sales higher. You know, they bought Blue Buffalo. Pet food sales up 14% for General Mills. So there's some good news. Dagen, back to you.
Gerri Willis, thank you so much. Good to see you. Coming up, some final thoughts from these All-Stars. Stay with us. President Trump just tweeting this. China has openly stated that they're actively trying to impact and change our election by attacking our farmers, ranchers, and industrial workers because of their loyalty to me. What China does not understand is that these people are great patriots and fully understand that China has been taking advantage of the United States on trade for many years. They also know that I am the one that knows how to stop it. There will be great and fast economic retaliation against China if our farmers, ranchers, and/or industrial workers are targeted. Exclamation point. Let's get some final thoughts from our panel. Lindsey Bell, to you first.
I mean, definitely going to keep an eye on this trade situation, but I kind of think that Trump has the upper hand here. So I'm on Trump's side.
If you're using tariffs as a negotiating tool, then I think that at the end of the day, people are expecting deals to get done. That's why there's so much attention being paid. Mexico, that slice of NAFTA got done. On to Canada. Let's see if they can put something together this week. Very few hurdles there.
I think the president missed out on an opportunity by saying #Covfefe at the end. I ordered the iPhone XS. But it's the
well,
the 10S.
You got to do the thing. You got to. Okay, thank you.
It's the 10S, but how do you not call it XS? But I got the smaller edition. That way, I will never make the mistake again where I had that bulge during my wedding photos. Can't Photoshop that out. It's a bummer.
No, so yes, take a look at Kevin's wedding photos. It was noticeable.
I'm just fine with this phone. I've had this phone forever. It's small. It works. I don't really need that. XS?
XS.
A little bit much.
At least you have a smartphone.
Yeah,
my father still has a bag phone. And before we go, all our thoughts and blessings to all the people in the Carolinas and in the Southeast who are still battling against floodwaters, and we'll keep covering this story. On to Varney & Company and Mr. Charles Payne. Hey, Charles.
Hey, Dagen, thank you very much. I'm Charles Payne. Stuart will be back tomorrow